Well, welcome back from lunch. How many of you guys have had lunch by yourselves? Is this the first time this year? And anybody? No kids were bothering you? I think you guys were saying that you were super excited to have lunch without kids behind you. Hey, what you doing? What's going on? So I hope you enjoyed that at least. So on the valuation, you guys could put, we had nice, good lunch. Hopefully other things as well. But all right, we're going to keep going. We don't have that much time. We're in the second part of the day. I hope you guys learned something from the first part or thought about it or processed something differently to take back to your district. Or if you have more questions, you can, of course, ask us those. But SDI also has to be research-based and data-driven. So anything that you're using with students have to be research-based. Sometimes I've seen in IEPs, especially students with autism, people use social stories. But those aren't technically research-based. They might work with your student, but that wouldn't be SDI because they're not research-based. So that was I've read that, and Marilyn Friend kind of blew my mind because I have kids with autism, and I used to use that, and I'm like, wait, okay. So those are great practices to use with students, but they have to be research-based for who you are serving. So if you have to think about this, your considerations are disability, age, setting, subject area, and specific skills. So students with learning disabilities, research-based are those, I think Katie was talking about, like yes ma'am, those kinds of things. Those are research-based for students with learning disabilities. Maybe students that have to do those strategies that count out or decode or clap, if those are unique to their learning disability, then that is research-based for them. So just thinking about that when you're planning on SDI. Yes?
Role-playing.
Research-based.
Yes, would that be in there?
If you're teaching, so you're teaching students how to role play?
Doing whatever it is that their kind of lagging skill is. It could be social.
Teaching and role playing,
Yeah.
practicing.
And then
So if you're practicing it,
yeah.
no, I would say, right? If you're teaching them,
Well,
if it's
some of
a
it
teacher behavior,
can be a modeling thing.
in
so
modeling,
if you're-
but modeling,
yeah.
if you say modeling,
So you
Yeah.
say yes.
I would say that.
Yes.
through role playing.
All right. Thank you. Good question. Go Center Grove. I remember you over there. I'm trying to remember you guys. So special education teacher implementation. Basically this slide we're just talking about, we're looking at sometimes the student progress and gap isn't always looked at. So we tend to know, and I think one of our colleagues always brings us up, she was a special education teacher and she was super excited when her students would grow, they, oh, look what I did on NWEA, they grew this much. And they'd go to the gen ed teacher and they're like, yeah, but we're supposed to be over here. You grew 4 points, which is great, and you guys should have a party and you should be successful and you should be excited about it. But unless you know where you're supposed to go, it's really hard to look at that gap. So really thinking about looking at the gaps of your students. Are the students on a trajectory to kind of meet those other kids? Because you have to make up all that time and the gap needs to close. So that was just kind of a funny thing, and she was like, we were so excited, but then we looked and we saw that the other students were making 13 points gain, and we're like, wait, okay. So just thinking about that and having those conversations with that gen ed teacher is helpful to know where the students are supposed to be, and it's great that you're making those gains, but remembering that you have to kind of close that gap in there.
And sometimes I think when we look at those pieces, one of the reasons we talk, this is like an aha moment for me, especially looking back on self-contained classrooms and things like that, was I remember I had to teach a self-contained history class, which I love history, but it's a whole different thing to love it and to teach it. And I thought I was doing a pretty good job, and then finally I got a chance to go in one of those early release days to one of the PLCs that the history team held. And just listen to them talk about it and talk about what they're doing in class, I realized I just wasted a bunch of time. We were focusing on the wrong things. And I didn't have that opportunity. And I got better after that, but I didn't have the opportunity before. I could have spent a whole lot more. I could have mirrored what they were doing instead of making my own thing up. And that's kind of this piece too. When you talk about the progress that's expected and this collaboration all together is. Part of it is for special educators. Let's not waste time on things that aren't going to be assessed, that don't matter let's focus on things that we really need to focus on, and because that's part of the question every time I talk because we talk about this piece, one of the pieces we talked about at lunch a little bit was time to do it. And we're never going to have more time to do anything, but what we can look at is how we spend the time we do have. You know, how much time am I spending on things I don't need to spend it on? And being really, I guess, stingy with how you spend your time and attention during the course of a day, because it's pretty intense work to be a special ed teacher. And it's intense not just for you, but for the student as well. So we don't want to waste that time. And we don't want to overdo it, we don't want to underdo it. We want to find that balance in there of how do we focus this so we get the best return. And so it's really having that gen ed teacher as part of that conversation can help us focus, where do you need it? Where does this student need my intervention so we can make progress and close that gap if we can? Because we can spin our wheels like, well, I'm talking too long because Alana's looking at me like, okay. No, but I was thinking about how often, and this might, I don't want it to start an argument here, but you know, we have this conversation a lot of times about when we can start using the calculator versus not. And that's one of the issues I always run into is, you know, we talk about looking at number sense and computation skills. How long do we plug away at that before we hand over a calculator and say, okay, let's give you access to these higher order processes? So those are the conversations we have to have. If we spend so much time on computation, every time we do that, we're taking time away from that student to learn something else. So we do the best we can, but at some point we have to make that decision. Where's the trade? And that's the hard part is you can't just say, well, when we get to 5th grade, now it's a switch. It's kind of a student-by-student discussion that you have to have. And the student's still going to have to learn, be taught how to use a calculator properly and all those kind of things. And how do you want that to look like in your classroom might be different than somebody else. But, that's one place you can get back some time is let's move on from this action. So.
Okay, so SDIs and processes, we've already talked about this. We're direct, explicit instruction, self-regulated strategy development, modeling, we're going to talk about what that is, maintenance and generalization. This is just from Friend's book. This is the processes that we're going to talk about. So I do, we do, you do. Does anyone do the gradual release model with their students? Yeah, that's what I did also. So the I do is the modeling, demonstration, and examples. We do, making sure the students are able to perform that together with each other, or maybe with with me, with the teacher. And then you do, would that be the independent practice after you model, after you practice, then getting that exit slip or product from the student to be able to make sure that they know or the objective. So that would be the direct explicit instruction. That would be a gradual release model. Self-regulated strategy development, you can read these, obviously, but discuss the strategy, what are we using, model the strategy, memorize the strategy, whatever you're doing, helping teach students how to use their strategies. So you first have to use them, show them how to use yes ma'am, tell them what it means, model how to do it, have them practice, and have them do it on their own. And support the strategy. Some students can't remember all the steps, so you write it down, so you model in your head and you write down what the steps are and maybe pass it to those students that need that so that they can read it so they don't forget those steps when they're doing that yes ma'am strategy or whatever strategy you guys are learning. So really just making sure that they have those supports needed and then fade them away once they learn those. Scripted, like we said, a true model is a model when you're thinking out loud with your process without students interrupting. You say, you guys have to hold your questions when they're little. You always say, sit on your hands while I'm going to model this for you so that they don't answer questions or talk or try to sit on their hands or, when they're little. But when you are going through the processes out loud and you're showing the students step by step what to do, you just want to make sure that you're letting them see your thinking before they get to add anything first. So a true model is making sure that they can see your thinking without getting interrupted, because some students really need to see a clear model without a lot of people interrupting. Repeat with the student participation, and maybe you have to take them and model it again for a couple more students because they didn't get it, and provide them with immediate feedback. If they're not doing something right in the process, make sure that you're giving them that feedback, and then close with a brief summary of how they did on that. So that is just live modeling, how you script it in your mind. Is everybody pretty familiar with that? Yes. I've seen some models that were tells instead of they're explaining it and they're telling, and the students are like, they're all like, what? So if you really do a really clear, concise model, I think that's super important for all students, but some students that might be at their SDI.
I was going to throw in there too, with each one of those pieces, it's error-free reproduction for the students. That's what you're trying to get to with each one of those pieces, and some of that is difficult with a larger group, especially. And not to say these are only used for special ed students either. These are typical pieces, but that one of the core pieces. Oh, I keep saying pieces over and over. One of the core concepts I think of is, as you're going through that, Alana, was the opportunities to respond. Just polling students constantly to see where they are, and having different methods to do that, so you understand. So there's no surprise who doesn't have it, who does have it, and you're ready to move on from that event, because that's one of those pieces I think that when you get to observe teachers themselves think they do a really good job of, but when you watch yourself do it later on, you kind of cringe a little bit. You didn't give them enough, so that's I don't know, just given that, just something to think about as you're going through these models is kind of underlying some of that.
Oh yeah, I definitely recorded myself when I was modeling some things because I wanted to see if I did it correctly the way you're supposed to do it. So that's just a way to do it. We used to have subs back a long time ago, so that you could have a friend come and watch your model. And then I had, at different parts, we had to do that in our school. Like every week we focused on something different. And one of them was the modeling because there was a lot of telling going on. And once we fixed that, and even in myself, I internalized that and I had other people give me feedback, it helped me teach my students. So that was something that, you're right, Matt, is important to think about. So virtual modeling, this happened yesterday. My son's friend has a really hard time in math, and so he went home with 10 homework problems of multiplying fractions, and he did not know how to do any of them. And and my friend's mom called, and she's like, "Did my son Joaquin have homework?" And I'm like, "No, he does it at school because my son's really good at math, and I don't even know what he's doing ever." And she's like, "Well, Paolo doesn't know how to do this. How can you, what?" And I'm like, did the teacher model it? Is there a video that she sent home? And she's like, no, we just came home with these homework. So he has no idea, and I do think he's going to qualify for an IEP. But he has no idea. He's like, Mom, I just don't. She gave me a computation chart, and I'm like, well, let's go online and look for a model. So it's really important if you have like a virtual model to break down those pieces. Because sometimes I've seen teachers, they would model themselves while they do their math lesson, and then the student can watch it later. And I think that's really, really important for kids to remember that. So he came home with his 10 questions, and he was not going to get that homework done tomorrow, except for his mom had to help and figure it out. But it's really useful for kids that he's like, I know she taught me this, but I can't remember the steps. Like he had no idea. So just making sure that you break down for the student or write it down the steps. Even if he had them written down, he probably could have done it. And it's useful for independent activities. Like he came home with his homework and he couldn't do it. So I just think about that when we're thinking about virtual modeling, maybe writing it down for students for the steps, or maybe putting a video. If you're already going to record it if you're doing it for the class anyway, you can record it so that he can hear it later again. That's just an idea. And it happened yesterday, so. And then maintenance, does a student retain the curriculum once it's been presented? I think Matt talked about this before with his POP example, with the students buying drinks. Making sure the students can generalize the skill. Make sure that if they mastered the skill, they don't forget it. Sometimes our students have a hard time with memory. They know it tomorrow, but next week they forgot. So we're gonna have to go back and go back and see. Do you guys remember what we did last week? And then just prepare for maintenance. Just check on those skills that you thought you taught already, because sometimes they can maybe go away if you don't practice them. And then keep data on the progress monitoring. So those are some tips on that. We already kind of talked about this. If they already know something, then you can adjust the setting, the antecedent, who are they doing it with, who are they behind. They can do the goals in your resource class. Can they do it in the gen ed class? Can they do it all the time? Just thinking about that. So we gathering data. We kind of went over this. I'm not going to go too much in depth. So we have a website, What Works Clearinghouse. I don't know, and it's linked to you guys. You guys don't have to look at it now, but you can. And it has a lot of great SDI strategies. So if you need a resource to look for some of those, you can. They talk about backwards chaining and all of the things we talked about. But there are interventions and strategies that you can explore and maybe go back with your team and have an SDI party and bring some donuts and drinks and everybody can talk about it. But it is a good resource for you. And usually, are we going to let them do it now?
Yeah,
or okay, so we're going to let you guys explore it now. Actually, I'm sorry, I thought you were going to do it later. But we're going to explore it now, and we're going to see if you can find it. You can look on your phone. You don't have to, but have you guys heard of this? Anybody heard of this one? No. Yeah, you have. Oh, do you use it?
I used it when I was getting my sped license.
Oh, okay. Okay. Was it useful?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, at least then she thought it was useful, so that's good.
And I like some of these. I mean, there's more than this too. So I'm gonna kind of ask you guys also, after you have a little time here, to look through just a few minutes, and what other sources do you have? Do you share with your staff, or you use yourself to look for strategies and to find ways to address student needs in the classroom as well? So
What do you use?
We have Goalbook.
Goalbook?
helps.
If you have to pay for it.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. There's a few districts that use that. Goalbook is a system it's a gold bank.
It's a bank, right?
And
Yeah.
it also uses, you put in information, it'll give you
Oh.
interventions. Now, I think Goalbook pieces, like, as long as we have some things like that, as long as we take them for face value as we're evaluating them too, don't just take them as cut and paste
Right, wait.
kind of things. I think that's always a danger when you have pre-built systems of any kind. Because I get that. I used to have districts producing their own gold banks and things, and which is kind of okay, but before too long, you get people just picking the two or three that they like and overusing that stuff. So
I haven't seen that. I dove into
I'm not
that.
sure about the SDI in there, but
I think it's USDA.
Yeah.
it's a lot of UDL.
Oh, UDL. Okay.
yeah, I think I don't know, when we're talking about SDI, it's really just trying to paint the lines between where we know they are and where we'd like to end up at the end of the IEP. So that's really what we're trying to do, is connect those dots with what are we going to do now that we know the student has this need. What do we plan to do about it as instructors and as professionals? So, and what we're trying to get at today is take a little bit of that weight off just the special ed teacher and share it, because that's kind of the shared load is a lighter load kind of idea. Still might not like carrying it, but it's still going to be lighter.
Can you walk us through kind of this What Works Clearinghouse?
Can sure try. I'm going to get. Let me see if I can.
Yeah. I was clicking on it. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we'll get it up on here so we can look through it.
So when you look down here, you go by keywords or topics. So you can get children, youth, and disabilities, for example, and just search by general. Or there we go. So there's a whole kinds of pieces in there, articles and pieces like that, and you look at literacy. So there's providing reading interventions. There's tier 1, so you can see interventions, how they're adjusted to MTSS tiers already. So you can look for those kind of interventions. It's pretty slick how they have it sorted out. And I know there's more than just this, but when I get to, read different articles around from different professional articles, they mention this a lot. And they are constantly updating it and rating things. So, and like I said, there's a lot of professional articles in here, a lot of support for what we're already doing. And I think what's nice, sometimes it's a lot of support for what you're already doing. You might not have the name that they have for it, but that's one of the things I think I discovered as I began teaching, is I had learned a lot of strategies to support students, and didn't see the research till later, but they were supported as well.
Oh yeah, NCII.
Yeah. Intervention Central is one place that you can look into. It's a website that's been around a long time. National Center for Intensive Interventions is another place. NCII is another place you can find a lot of supports there. Gosh, I know there's more, but I can't think of any other ones. Those are the ones I commonly run against.
And they even rate the strategies, like with Fidelity, what kind of thing. I mean, I just think that that's research-based, SDI, things that you can look and see what's worked, what's research-based, and all of those kinds of things. When you have so much free time.
Well, it's kind of like I said, we don't want to waste our time on things that we know don't work. You know, that's some of the pieces. I think sometimes we get that. That's one of the pieces that gets involved when you talk about MTSS and some different is being real focused on what we are doing and being purposeful in those choices. I'm going to switch back to the other view.
And we're just trying to give you some resources that maybe will work, help you.
If you do get into the What Works Clearinghouse, those tiers don't align with MTSS tiers. I think I misstated that. Those are just how effective they are. So if it's tier 1 for them, then that's a highly effective intervention. And tier 3 would be a lower, not as effective. So we just wanted to give you a little time to explore that tool. Is there anything else that you all have access to? We talked about the Gold Book being an option. Any other sites or resources that you lean on for different interventions or ideas, starting points, other than just other teachers or your book that you had from college? I was telling my daughter that the other day. I still have the special education instructor, exceptional children book from college that they wouldn't buy back. So it's a little outdated at this point, but that's kind of the way it goes. So what you all have, what we're going to try to do next here, so the next piece we're going to do is just the little practice session here. And this is kind of the closing section of our day. We're going to look at a couple examples. This first one we're going to look at together and talk it out a little bit, so hopefully invite you guys to kind of jump in with us and we can talk about it a little bit. We're going to look at Jose's information here shortly, and the things we're going to do, we'll come back to this slide so we kind of get an idea, but I think you have the example in front of you just now. Thank you for doing that. Appreciate it. And we're going to look at the information we have, decide which goals we're going to address, maybe to look at the steps we're going to take when planning, options, how we're going to monitor progress, and we'll look at some things. So there's resources in your Padlet that are kind of nice. There's a thing called these root cause and skill charts. So if the student's showing reading difficulties, there's a whole hierarchy of different ways to break that down. So it goes into different aspects. So that can be really helpful when you're trying to find a root cause of a problem, just to kind of pull it back and looking at depth. So that can be helpful there. And then there's also some documentation on effective practices in special education. So those can be good resources too. Those are all in the Padlet for us. So this is our student. His name is Jose. He's 10.6 years old, 5th grader, and the focus is comprehension. So here's a little bit about him. So we know that, and this is more or less present level statements, giving us some background information, so you guys have that in front of you. While you're reading it yourselves, I'll go ahead and read it up here. New student in the 5th grade, it's April. This is the 3rd school Jose has been in this year. He adapts well to change. That's good. Has a positive attitude towards school and appears to have made friends at his new school. Jose does well in math, enjoys science and social studies. In the area of reading, Jose is able to easily decode unfamiliar words and reads with good expression. However, in the area of comprehension, Jose has difficulty answering questions that require reasoning and total understanding of the story. He also has difficulty identifying the main idea or main components of a story. Jose's teacher, Mrs. Lundy, states that although he enjoys reading and does not seem to be frustrated, he will not ask for help when needed, thus his reading grade is beginning to suffer. And they have the following instructional goals for Jose. So a couple things when you look through this. As far as present levels go, I would want more data orientation in this one than what we have. This is more general statements go around this student. So I'd probably want to know a little bit more, what do you mean by able to easily decode unfamiliar words? What do you mean by difficulty answering questions? What's your information that supports those statements? That's kind of the issue sometimes we get into with present levels, is we generally tell a story and forget to give the details. Because we want in order for us to really form up a good plan and a good goal for the student, we have to have a good baseline information to go forward with them. So having said that, I'm just saying that I'm going to get comments about the quality of present level, so I'm going to go ahead and say those things. So we'll say, goal's not the best either, but these give you the general idea. So given a reading passage on his instructional level, Jose will answer inferential and evaluative comprehension questions. Or giving a reading passage at his instructional level, Jose will recall the main story elements. So I have problems with both of those goals actually, but get the general idea as you look at them. I think you can pick. I don't want to go into too much detail of what I see wrong with those things, but so just to give you a minute or so just to digest that all that content there. It's kind of a long passage. It probably didn't help me editorializing the whole thing as I was going through it, but. So based on what we know, which isn't a whole lot, what would be of these two goals, which one of these things would you want to address first? I don't know if there's a right or wrong here, just which one of those would rise up for you as you're looking at the goals. Answering inferential and the comprehension questions, or recalling the main story elements, recording the main story elements start, and then get to we're going to need this in order to do this thing. And I think you guys, I know you do this all the time, but that is the step a lot of people miss right there is being able to prioritize what has to happen first. In order for us to get anywhere near these, we have to do this thing first. So that's something that's important when you go through goals, is to prioritize. Because we talked about this, I think I talked about it with a couple people at lunch, but the kids that we serve have so many needs sometimes, it's hard to figure out where do we even start. And that's a conversation in and of itself, just to go through, here's all the things we need to do. We have to pick a starting point, though. And there's no really right or wrong. We have to do our best to here's the best starting point we have, let's go. And they'll get started working on them. Because sometimes I remember being kind of paralyzed with that decision, where do I even begin? This kid needs so much help with behavior. They're going out of control here. How do I begin working with them? Or their readings, or they're in high school and their reading level is at a grade school level. How do we get them where they need to understand, comprehend what's going on in the classrooms? And that's a big challenge. So we have to figure out, where do we begin? So looking at this piece of the main story elements there, I think we can go with that. Steps to take when planning this. So once we've determined, when we go through that, we can go back to that planning diagram once we've identified where we're going to go. It might be a ways back here, but we'll go back to it. There it is. Just looking at clarifying the target there. That's the setting of the goal here, where we want to get to by the end of this IEP. And then what's going to be difficult. So this is really nice if we're going to be pairing ourselves with a gen ed teacher, and I'm going to either kick the power cord or trip over here, but that identifying the barriers there, what's going to get in the way of this getting here, what's going to be the trouble, what's going to be a concern as we're trying to instruct this student around that particular area, as we're trying to bring up their understanding. And then, thinking through I think that Benninghoff does a nice job with this, that task analysis, that, what all do I need to teach the student in order to do this? And for me to complete this task, this is that metacognition aspect is for me to complete this task, what steps do I go through to do that? How do I do it? How do I want to teach the student how to get those things done? Because that's a piece that, I don't know if you remember this from elementary school, but I was thinking about this thing. I remember my kids doing it when the teachers would have them go home and write directions for how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then try to do it just following the directions alone without adding anything else. And it was a big sloppy mess to do that, but that's one of the things to think about when you go through this instruction. That this is nothing new. I don't think we're breaking any new ground here, but it's an idea that we sometimes overlook. That because it is so basic. How do we do this now? What's the student missing in this process that we can teach them about? If something's missing, something's not in the right place for this individual. So when we go back to Jose. There he is. We want to think about this. We went through the steps there. What kind of options do we have for this kiddo then? He does enjoy reading, so decoding doesn't seem to be an issue, although I can't really 100% say that's not a problem, because I've had plenty of kids that can read with inflection and purpose and emotion, but have no idea what they're reading. So that's a question I would ask in that piece too. So that's an assessment question, but saying that decoding is okay at his instructional level, whatever that happens to be. You want to think about specially designed instruction. So thinking about how that would look. What content and methodology and instructional design might we use for something like this? So we're thinking about this for this exercise, just one student. So that we'll just live in that little dream world that you can work in one student at a time all the time for now. But think about what might this look like for this student? What kind of thing? Where would you start with specially designed instruction with this one? Do you have any students kind of like Jose?
Well, we're assuming there's no language barrier, right?
Right, we're assuming. And I realized that when I picked this description that would be something somebody would bring up. Yeah, we're just assuming there's no language barrier to start. So but that's a good question too. Sometimes that gets overlooked when we have kids that are with English as a second language that assume they have a disability because they're trying to process two languages, and that's hard. That's a challenge right there. So we have to consider that when we go through the process.
I would probably start by instructing a graphic organizer how to use it.
How do you
And model it and
teach them how to use a graphic? So that could be something, and that could be something that we eventually put in as part of our goal, like giving a graphic organizer the student will, but we can also help them shape their own. Teach them how, because that's part of your SDI is teaching them how to use it, because that's one of the things I see people, well, here's a graphic organizer. Okay. On the other side of the paper, I'll just draw a picture. So teach me how to use it. How am I supposed to apply this beyond this situation? So that could be the special design instruction, is teaching them how to use those pieces. And I think teaching them those questioning techniques sometimes when we go through the process is how do we identify a main idea? What's this story about? Who am I thinking? So we have those different techniques we go through and try to discover those pieces. And I'm making that one up on the top of my head. I don't think that's a research-based one, but but there's different ways to address those pieces there. And one of the things too we were talking about at our lunch break is, when we do have, as far as group application of some of these pieces, we can have students reading in a small group, and within that group requiring different specially designed instructions. So just keep in mind that this doesn't necessarily mean we have to do every student singly by themselves, even though it may come to that with some cases, but a lot of times we can do groups of students and knowing who's in the room with me, what they need with that. I need you to work on this. I need to reinforce this piece. We talked about the different tools you have for students with dyslexia and how to break that down for them. So there's pieces like that. He's got skills to decode and sound them out. Right. Right. So those would be lots of checks to run with that piece, because that prior knowledge and just the vocabulary, because the pre-teaching and reteaching could be part of what's going on as you go through and find new vocabulary words, or you suspect are new vocabulary words for the student, and being able to reteach pieces. That's one of those. I found that out myself. I was reading something last night, Hattie's book, and we were talking about earlier how it was kind of a dense, what I call dense, and that the text is pretty, well, first of all, it's small, so it's hard for me to read with my little glasses on, but the content is so difficult to read that it takes a while to process those kind of things. So that's a barrier right there, because I could decode the words and read them to you and then be done and go, I don't know what they just said. And that's a barrier to me when I have to read research papers and books, and that's a barrier for us. So I don't know, I just wanted us to think about a little bit how we might do something like this, because we want to think about how we monitor progress as we're doing it, because that's one of the little questions that we have when we start to deliver instruction, how we're going to use this graphic organizer, what I want them to do, fill it out correctly, find the main idea, underline it, whatever action we want them to take. We want to be able to progress monitor that piece, so be able to keep track of how many times they do it correctly, or how many times do it incorrectly, and how they do it incorrectly, so we can support them in getting to where they need to be. So that's a big piece of this for SDI, is that what are we planning to do? What's the instruction look like? What's the progress monitoring look like? And that's kind of an interesting thing too, as we were talking about. We had a lot of conversations at lunch today. I'll have to bring those up, but thinking through the progress monitoring that already takes place with a lot of the different tiered approaches, like we might be able to take advantage of some of those things as well. So if they have a different methodology or a different content that's being taught, the progress monitoring might be the same for everybody, and we can take advantage of those things. So that's one of the big pieces that's a barrier for a lot of us, is just progress monitoring in general. So we have to do it. It's legally, that's one of our requirements. So this is part of that, another piece of that we need to have a plan to monitor progress. We need to have a plan. Special design instruction doesn't happen unless someone's keeping track of it too. It's kind of one of those pieces. So what I'd like you guys to do with this next one is kind of take your time, and I use Kevin in the last one, so I didn't use my own name over and over, but take a little time and look at this one. And we're going to come back to these questions here and look at each one of them. I think we have to look at, that's a little bit better as far as detail. Think about what goal might come out of this particular example and what specially designed instruction might look like for that student. So take a little time, read through that, and then it's going to take a little while, so we'll do 10 minutes, and you can incorporate a break in this too, so if you need to get up and move around, we can do that. You've been listening to us, I guess, me talk for a while, so we'll go ahead and take 10 minutes to get on this one, and then we'll come back and compare notes. I wasn't joking when I said there'd be quizzes later on during the day. Chances to do some work here. So some of the things that I was walking around talking to folks as we're going through this, and a couple things that I wanted to, reinforce is, one, there's not a perfect answer to these questions. I think everybody's going to, we were talking about, everyone's going to have a different set of resources, a different set of experiences. Your school building might have something set up just for this in particular, and others might not. You might be working individually or with a small group or with a team, and that's going to make it look a little different for what you. So that's something to consider as you're looking at this, because you're all looking at it from, if this student appeared in my school, what would I do? So everyone's experience is going to be a little bit different in that perspective. So it's the idea, that's one of the reasons we talk about the concepts here and not like, well, here's the only way to do this. Do the same kind of things when we train around goals. Like here's the idea is there's no one way to do this. There's no perfect answer all the time, but here's the framework we should be within. So that's kind of what we're talking about with SDI too, that we want to think about, the core thing is that instructional piece. So when we look at this student, there's a couple of decisions you can make within this thing. I don't know if, there's the reading concept, there's also executive functioning within this process. So you could decide which way you want to address this. So do I want to do the reading first? Or do I want to address the executive functioning first? How do I want to do that? Or the anxiety piece is also there as well. So there's a couple different things in play for this student. And there's a little bit better data around this, a little bit more information, I suppose, but we still don't have a lot of hard numbers to go from. And that's one of the pieces I always try to share with teachers as I do these kind of things. The better numbers we have, the less discussion we have to have about where we are. If it's all about what I think and feel, then we are going to have all different impressions about where we think the student might be and what we think would benefit them. But we go back to information that we have and we can say definitively, here's where we are, here's what has worked, here's what has not worked, and let's go with what's worked. So what are some of the things your discussions around this particular student?
We focus on the reading component, and then, but the writing, I'm sorry. But, obviously the executive functioning is something in there, but a lot of kids anyway with that attention deficit disorder, writing can be the trigger. That alone can be the trigger. So we kind of ventured more into maybe helping him with that component with the writing, and that might reduce some of that anxiety.
All right.
So we focused on that.
And that's one of the things that I mentioned earlier, is there a skill problem or a performance? We don't really know that from this one. Is it doesn't know how to do it or doesn't know when to do it correctly? So you have to ask yourself, because that's the kind of question that I don't think this one really answers for us, is do I need to teach them the writing skill? Maybe that's a piece that's getting in the way, that I have a hard time with the physical act of doing it, so that's a problem. And or do I just not know what to do? That's a really good point. Anyone else want to add to that piece?
Or because of ADD, you get frustrated, you can't do the whole paragraph, so you focus on the writing and chunking it out. And that might help with the anxiety because, again, you're breaking it down.
Right.
You talk to him about we talked about like different organizers, like a trees organizer or whatever the level you're at, and knowing,
right.
how to do it.
Yeah, just be teaching them those different.
Those paragraphs where they have to fill it in, practice, make it small.
Right.
It short.
Teaching them those different separate skills as you're going through it, and hopefully to put it all together at some point down the road. Yeah. And I think one of the things, thinking about how the student can develop some of those tools on their own to make, we're going to have these pre-made pieces, but what's going to help you and what language makes sense to you makes it your own thing might be an interesting thing to do. Anything else? Anyone else? I appreciate all those comments, by the way. That's really good stuff.
I would have just made the SCI explicit instructions of how to use your graphic organism.
So that's our starting point.
Yeah.
Let's
Just so once you get some things on writing, then the rest of it can probably decrease the anxiety.
start building that comfort level within that process, right? And I think
reading two texts, first of all, what's the writing task? Ways of narrative, how do you want to respond to teaching them specific things to look for in the text, and how do you respond to that? How do you put in order persuasive? How are you going to argue that?
yeah.
So that writing task is really good to man on.
Yeah, it just says complex writing tasks, so that doesn't give you a whole lot of framework. So what John was saying, it matters the type of writing you're asking the student to do. If you're just giving them a simple writing prompt and say, write a few paragraphs about how you feel about unicorns, that's one thing. But if you're giving okay, let's read a couple paragraphs about, the Civil War, and then tell me how that applies to us today, that's a little bit different understanding. And that also engages a whole lot of prior knowledge I'm supposed to have and all those things. So those are pieces that you would think of. When you think about the task, does this student have the knowledge to even start that conversation? Or do we have to start building that piece also? Because that's one of those pieces that's, science of reading talks about a lot. If we're going to have to comprehend something, there's a whole lot of knowledge that's understood that maybe I don't have, depending on where I'm from and what I've learned so far. So I think we've been kind of all around the different pieces, thinking about how we're going to address those pieces, whether it's looking at teaching them how to teaching explicit instruction around the graphic organizer. I'll get there eventually. Around the graphic organizer, looking at their writing skills specifically and teaching them how to break it down into pieces and tasks. So that could be, really instructive as well. Having the student outline their before they begin. There's different methods and tools you can, and I heard some acronyms as we're going through those different pieces as we're looking at them. So I think those are all good pieces. Anything else you want to add? Yes, ma'am.
So this is a technical student, and like I said, I think I write in too much in my SDI problem. Somewhere along the line, how many years ago at a transition training, they told us in the SDI that we have to somehow tie that to their transition. So for example, Matthew says he wants to go to college and major in journalism.
Okay.
But I somehow in that SDI box need to talk about how improved reading comprehension or writing skills, will aid him in his education.
Which, for journalism, that's a pretty direct.
Does it have to be in there?
Well, I can't speak to transition pieces, but I do know. I don't believe the SDI box is part of the rubric for transition right now.
It's not.
Like I said,
But it may be one of those quality things. That would be one of those quality pieces, that if we're talking about a transition age student, we're going to, here's the ultimate outcome the student's looking for. So we want to put some of those steps in place. Like we're working on this because him struggling in this area is going to be an impairment to him eventually getting to this outcome. It's not bad, yeah. It's always good practice to talk through that stuff. And I think that's, in the bigger picture, that's the student's going to have some input on that too. They're going to be talking about, I want to do this, but I'm really struggling with writing. How can you help me? Hopefully wouldn't that be a great conversation to have with our students that understand where I need the help. Here's where I need some support. Where can I find it? Because that's ultimately the skill they're going to need going forward as adults. Yes, ma'am.
So if we were to write a goal on
Oh boy.
prepared text, like responses,
Uh-huh.
in the SDI, could we put something like the yes ma'am strategy? 'Cause one time we were told not to be.
Too specific?
Yes.
Well, as far as being, all right, let's see if I can do this right. So one of the things, when we talk about like present levels, I always encourage folks to be specific there. And here's what we use in order to get the outcome that we're measuring or showing you here. I kind of back off a little bit, and some people will say different things. So I don't want to say this is like the ultimate answer to this, but I always encourage folks to describe the strategy they're using so that if I use something else, I'm not just... Now, the exception to that would be, I know this is the only one that works. It's evident in the process that this is the only tool that we have found after trying these 20 other things that works for this student. 20 is just a number I picked out of my head, so you don't have to go do 20 trials to see the 21st working there. But that's something to think about. It's like, I know this one works. This is the only thing that's effective. Like we have that, for example, with students with dyslexia a lot of times. Like, here's the system that works for this student. If you know something that works and it's accessible to everyone, why would you do anything else? But if there's multiple ways to provide that same support, then I just give it a general overview of what we're looking for. Because there's even those titled Orton Gillingham and other pieces like that, some districts don't have those pieces, even though it works for the students you're working for. We just need a sensory-based approach to this particular skill, and that's fine. They can use whatever system they have or they've developed that'll do that kind of thing. So I don't know. I think the thing for me, the IEP is kind of like a recipe of how we're going to provide services. So we can fill in. If we don't have that one, we have to fill it in with something else. So it'll give each other kind of the room to do that. Does that make sense? Because I think otherwise we get down to, this is my preferred method, so I know it works, but I want you to do it. And that's something, telling another teacher how to instruct whenever there's other options is kind of a little stepping over the line a little bit. So, but, you know, the whole Matt said argument doesn't always hold water with some of that stuff. And I have talked with other folks who go the other direction, like let's just name it out, tell it, you know. But I'm leaning toward just giving folks a little leeway in that. And same thing with when you get into the services, being descriptive of what you're going to do without being proscriptive, you know, being too, being boxing people in with those descriptions there. So let me ask you this. I know we have another example here. This is, we're all up for choice and preference here. You guys feel like you want to go through another example? We'd also like to give you an opportunity, some time to do two things really. If you have an opportunity to pull up your own work and look at it and see if you want to have some discussions around that. We're not going to go around and ask you to share out, well, what have you done wrong today, and share it with the group or anything like that. But we want to give you an opportunity to do that while we have some support here today, so we can kind of give you some insight on those kind of things. Another option would be to spend some time talking through what you want to take back and how you want to present that too, so you have a little time to kind of unpack some things from today, and we can give you whatever feedback we have. So would you guys prefer going through another example? Or if some of you want to go through another example, we can do that as a separate group, and others can do other things. We can be pretty flexible that way.